Hello everyone, this is Alex, and today we're talking about orchestral tonal music. So you're wondering maybe, well, Alex, tonal music is dead. No, it's not dead. Sorry, Schoenberg. It's very much alive and something we hear in every film score. So it's very important for us arrangers or orchestral composers to understand the implications of tonal music through the writing itself. And it's a good way to start with this when you're learning about orchestration, because once you arrive with the orchestra, you're always wondering, well, there's so many instruments. What note am I giving this instrument? And what about this one? What about this one? Like if you have a D major chord and you'll see my example is in D major, who's going to play which note? How do you know? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you my thought process for this. And it all starts with four-voice chorale writing. So four-voice chorale writing is a practice that was popularized by Bach, and it involves writing a piece of music with a specific chord progression in a specific tonality, sometimes modulating a little bit, but usually in a very short form, and it usually starts with the first degree and contains cadences, dominant chords, subdominant chords. And although I'm not going to cover everything about four-voice writing in this video, you might learn a thing or two, and most importantly, I'm going to show you how to use this idea to develop your orchestration, to develop an orchestration that makes sense, that is coherent, and that doesn't feel disbalanced harmonically. So before we get into the example, what I mean by that is that usually when you present a chord, you have 3 notes or 4 notes or 5 notes, but in tonal music, most of the chords have only 3 notes. So you have the root note, the third, and the fifth. So let's say you're in D major. Again, the example I'm going to show you is in D major. You have D, F sharp, and A on the first degree. So D is the first degree. Well, then there are some notes that are going to be prioritized in this chord, and you got to know what they are. Now I'm going to develop this idea in my video, but this shows you that you need to be careful when you decide which instrument is playing which note. And what's crazy is that you can apply this to any kind of discourse, modal, atonal, polyharmonic, microtonal, whatever. How many instruments you put on one note is actually the weight you're giving to this note. Is actually power. It's a way for you to show that this note is more important than the others. Or if you want all of the notes to be equal, then you got to go carefully about what instrument you put on each of these notes. So if you're a beginner and you don't understand much about four-voice chorale, think about the weight of each of these notes. It's a very simple concept to understand, and you'll see me elaborate on this in this video. Now, before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy the content, and please consider subscribing to the channel. You can click this little join button here, and this gives you access to all the scores I'm presenting in my video as a downloadable link. And if you're interested also, you can book one-on-one lessons with me. I'll leave all the details in the description below. But now let's dive into this video. So here's what we're starting off with today. We have something in D major. It's a 4-bar, 5-bar progression in a tonal writing. So we are in D major. I've written down the different degrees we're going through here to show you exactly how this is constructed. So basically we started with a first degree, going to the 5th degree, and then march going up. We have the 2nd degree and then the 6th degree afterwards. So you'll hear this kind of a repetition, 2-bar repetition, and then leading somewhere else. So this is very much typical of tonal discourse, and then going onto something else, moving a little bit faster in the harmonic rhythm. The harmonic rhythm is basically the speed at which you present the different rhythms. So we have here a harmonic rhythm of a half note again, and then half note again, half note, and then every quarter note here. So the harmonic rhythm is speeding up here, so leading up to what's going to happen afterwards, which is 1 6 4, which is going on to 5th degree, and then 1st degree. So this is a perfect cadence, very typical of the tonal discourse and the classical discourse in general. So let's hear the simple piano reduction first, and then we're going to orchestrate it. Now, as we get into this, we got to be careful on which note we put more emphasis. Not all of these notes can be equal within the orchestra, within the way we're presenting it. And this is something we learn when you're doing four-part chorale. So if you got the first degree of a chord, let's say we get our D major here, our first degree, we need to have emphasis on the root note. So here it's mostly adapted for the piano, which means it doesn't take into account all of these considerations in the four-part chorale. But generally in a four-part chorale, you have to have more emphasis on the root note. So the D in that case for the first degree of D major. Then you usually have as much weight or less weight on the fifth of the chord, which is the A here. And then less weight generally on the third degree, which is the F sharp. So a perfect representation of that would have to take off this F sharp here, because now all of these three notes are equal. So we'd have to take this one off. And then to bridge the gap between all of these, I would put back this D here. So we'd have three Ds, one A, and one F sharp. So this creates a very solid root chord of D major, especially when you're presenting at the beginning. And once you start to follow that, you realize that maybe here, when you have four voices, maybe here you don't have access to the E for the dominant chord. So that means that this dominant chord here will have only two notes from the chord, as opposed to this first chord, which has all three notes. So this is something we have to take into account while we try to orchestrate this. I'm going to go back to the original version, because as we have so many instruments at our disposal, so many groups of instruments, we need to be careful not to put too much emphasis on, let's say, the third of the chord, and make sure our root from our chord is very clear, and that we don't introduce harsh sounds like parallel fifths. And for that, we just have to make sure that we follow very carefully the direction of the upper line and the lowest line. This will make sure that if we hit the A here, we hit it in two different motions. So this one is going up, this one is going down. Because if you hit it from the same direction, then you create parallel octaves, which are bad. But this is also something you can learn from Counterpoint. I do have some Counterpoint video on this channel, some older videos you can watch. But also you can learn that from four-voice chorale. If you're interested in learning about four-voice chorale, let me know in the comments below, and I might make a video on this in the future. But maybe you know all of this, and you don't necessarily have to know all of this to get into this video and understand orchestration of this. So let's get into it and see how I proceed. So first, I always like to start with a string version, just to make sure that the core of my orchestra is solid, that we have great foundation, that all the lines from the original version are there, and then I can expand from this. And of course, this is very basic for strings. It's not like the nicest thing you're gonna have to hear for the strings. But basically, I'm following the upper melody with the first violin, and doubling the bass with the cello and the double bass here. So in tonal music, in classical music, the double bass is either on or off, but it's always doubling. But when it's there, I mean, it's always doubling the cello. The cello is really the bass line for the string orchestra in classical music, in older tonal music. So the double bass is just like extra sub. You know, it's like you press a button for sub sounds, then you get it with the double bass. So what you see here is actually that I turn this into a four-voice part, into a four-voice music, four-voice chorale, because really you only have four voice left. You have the bass line played by the cello and the double bass, the tenor line played by the alto, which is weird, but that's what we have, and the second violin is playing the alto line, and the soprano is played by the first violin. So that means that there are some notes that I took away. If I want to give you a heads up for this, in general, four-voice writing, you have the three upper voices are closer to each other, and then the bass line can be further down. You can have it like an octave or even lower from the upper, like the next line, the tenor line in that case. If you see here, I'm starting from an octave apart from each other, but going down here, that's 12th. And it's really no big deal. It doesn't create any problem. Just because the upper three lines are very well rooted together, and that's a thing with the bass line. Usually, lower sounds contains more harmonic, so this is a rule that you can apply to any kind of music. To have the lowest line alone downstairs, and upstairs you have the three other lines that are closer to each other. And by closer, I mean less than an octave. An octave is considered big in general, unless you have this very open chord and you really extend everybody. But usually when you have an octave, that means that you have no choice but to play the same note. So this means that if you're starting with the root note with your cello, then an octave here would be fine. But if you have an F sharp in your tenor line here, and you want an octave apart, so that means that this one's going to be high up here, and this one's going to be a third or something, because you don't have a choice here. That means that the voicing here is weird, because you have too much emphasis on this third of the chord. And if you're starting with the A here and you want an octave, it means that you have 2 times this fifth of the chord here. So you're putting a lot of weight on this. It's not so bad because it's more or less equal. And I'm saying equal, but not really, because the cello and the bass are considered really one voice here. So we have the D and then 2 times A. So there's more emphasis on the A, the fifth of the chord, than the actual root of the chord. So that's already bad. And even then, after that, you'd have to have a super high F sharp, and it's not very classical to have these extreme register. You see that a lot more in the romantic repertoire or something. But if you want something that is more classical, you generally need something that is easier to play and in a more comfortable register for the instruments. So that's why I chose this voicing, and I led on with it. I did change some of the notes to adapt to this, but if you follow this idea that first you don't want to have too much gap between the bass and the tenor line, and you want to generally have more weight on the root of the chord, a little bit less weight on the fifth of the chord, and generally less weight from the 3 of the notes on your third. But it might not be true everywhere, because here a little bit later we have this chord, which is actually a D major chord. It's a dominant chord because we introduced the C natural here, which leads to G major chord, so the 4th degree of D major. So I called it a 5 of 4. So it's the 5th degree of the 4th degree, which is D major dominant. And its root is actually not the 1st degree, it's actually the 3rd degree here. So we can put more emphasis on these chords. So this transposition is called a 6th chord. So if you have the 3rd at the root, you usually have a 6 between the 3rd and the next root. That's an octave higher. So F sharp to C, you have a 6. So that's why we call it a 6th chord. So in that case, it's okay to put more emphasis on the 3rd of the chord, if that makes sense. But in that case, I didn't even need to do that because the voicing led me clearly to represent all of the notes from the chord. So here we have F sharp, A, C, and then another A. So a little bit more emphasis on the A, less on the root, and some emphasis on the 3rd here. And this is all basic 4-voice writing. You just have to follow it very, very carefully when you're writing for the orchestra. Make sure that your arrangement fits into this and respect the rules of this. When you're, for instance, doing it for your basic string version, in that case, making sure that everything fits for 4-voice. And once you're good with this, you can go to your next version and start to include winds, start to include brass, start to include more movement as well. And the movement can be a lot freer once the base of the arrangement is solid like this. So let's have a listen to this second version, basic version for strings. So quite nice already. It's still a little bit basic, but because it's very much fitting the most basic version of this piano version at first. But don't worry, we're gonna make it more interesting, add some more movement eventually, but not yet because I want to add first woodwinds. So basic version for winds and strings. How can we add the woodwinds into this? And I'm saying the woodwinds, but I also mean the horns because I'm adding one horn as well. So it's a basic version for winds and strings. So in classical tonal music, you usually have very basic doublings. It's nothing crazy. You usually keep these four lines that we add. So this is exactly the same as the previous version. And you just double each of these voices with the woodwinds and to add a little bit of support. And that's if you want everybody to play in your wind section. You could have just the flute doubling the melody. This would make the melody stand out. You could have the flute double the melody and maybe for this part here, introduce the oboe a little bit later. That would be a great version too. If you want to do something like this and do an orchestral crescendo, so that means that you introduce different instruments and you make the orchestra grow through the music, that would be great. But I just wanted to show you first how to make the whole piece sound well for all of these, including all of these winds. So let's see, the upper voice, like I said, is played by the first violin. The clarinet is playing the melody too an octave lower. So that's where things get interesting, is that we're trying to, as the orchestra grows, we're trying to keep the melody up front. And a way to do that is to add a lowest octave and to make sure that all of these other instruments, like the horns and the oboe in particular, the bass line is not so bad because it's really much in this lowest register with the bass line of the strings. But the oboe and the horns are going to take a lot of place in here. So we just want to make sure that our melody is very well focused. We could also consider having this high melody on the clarinet, but I thought it was a little bit too high for the clarinet. It's not as comfortable as it is for the flute here. So this just add some warmth to the melody, a little bit of fluidity and some presence as well, while not interfering with the notes very much of the horns in that case. So we just added our winds instrument. Let's listen to this third version. So much more powerful, but again, it's not a very orchestral yet, in my opinion, because we just have these very basic doublings, which are indeed characteristic of classical period. And if you'd had doublings to do, simple doublings to do, it would be with these instruments. And for a tutti, of course, because now everybody's playing from the beginning to the end, and that's usually something I don't recommend for a piece of music. You need to let the music breathe, you need to let your musicians breathe, and a great way to do so is to stagger the entries, have some of the group features, and then the second part, other instrument featured. But this is just to show you where to place the instrument first. But now let's go to my fourth version, which is, well, suddenly a lot more crazy. So adding movements to the strings and oboe and adding first trumpet. So this is where it gets more orchestral. And the fact that I've went to step 2 and step 3 at first before going to that is that because I'm respecting all the way the main notes of these, every of these lines is the root note that I applied. Well, I mean, not the root note, but the note that I applied to these instruments in the past section. So if you see the cello, we have D, A, E, B, F sharp. And let's see what we have here. D, A, E, C, F sharp. All the notes are here, but I'm doing some I'm doing some movement between each one of them to add some life to the orchestral version so that it's not super dull. And if we see the same for the second violin we add A, C sharp, B, D, C sharp, D. So here, A, C sharp, B, D, C sharp, D. But I have something different, a lot more lively, a lot more string friendly, not just these long notes, boring notes, but I'm still following this very strict canvas that I have at first. And this is to show you that to get into more detailed orchestration, you just have to have a strong foundation. If you don't have this foundation, you're going to run into a lot of problems. The arrangement is not going to sound good. As opposed to here, once you have these foundations, then you can go and have some fun, but still not too much, because there's some places that the second violin is moving, but also the viola, and they are moving at different speed, and I had to match these different movements. Like, let's say, like here we have A, B, C, E, and here we have C, E, C. So then I use E, C. I could have used D, C, but since I have the C, E here, the D would have created seventh, which is a little bit dissonant in that style. So I prefer to have just these opposite movements. So E, C, and then C, E up here to have these notes here. But notice also, now I have a tenth between this is my alto line and my tenor line. So I told you earlier that generally in 4-voice writing, you shouldn't have more than an octave distance between the upper 3 voices. Since here it's not on the strong beat, it's not on the first beat where I present the chord, it's okay. It's just something that passed away, and that we don't emphasize it as we would have if we just fall back onto these more distant notes. So here you see I fell back onto my chord voicing that I had before, and it all makes sense. So you'll hear when I present you the arrangement. So also generally with that, you mainly want to have the bass line play notes from the chord. That's what I'm doing here. So actually arpeggios, basic arpeggios. The viola, the middle line here, is also doing these arpeggio, with just some exceptions. These are some of the notes from the alto line here. And I'm saying alto line again. This is the second violin's voice in the case of a choral writing. So this second line is moving more in a conjunct way, and it's interesting because it's adding some color to the upper melody. Fa, mi, fa, sol, la. And then you have here la, sol, la, si, do. So this is all these 3 notes here are actually sixth, parallel sixth, which is great, which is very beautiful for an harmonization. And I planned all this since the beginning here. I found an opportunity to have. I saw that my main notes from first and second violins are going from a sixth tier to a sixth tier. So I saw how can we do this and plan this so that it moves this way together. Usually what I do is that I just plan it like this. I write it when I see it exactly. The first thing I do as I write it down here. Then I wonder, well, how can I make this possible here? So we could have done something like this. Something like this could have worked. But I thought that adding too much movement in this voice would make it less characteristic. What I have here is more characteristic, and especially as I repeat it afterward, but it does lead somewhere else here. So anticipating the fact that this second part of this phrase is going to go somewhere else. So let's just have a listen first to the string section here. And let's forget about the winds for a second. So much more orchestral, and I forgot to tell you about the double bass. The double bass is just doing these pits on the main chord. So we don't need the resonance necessarily for us to remember what's the root note. Sometimes you just need these little punctuations, constant, that are driving the longer form of the phrasing, but not necessarily having us to listen to it all the way, you know? And this creates a much more airy and light string section, which you don't necessarily want all the time, but it's certainly a very refined tool to have and to be able to present it that way. As for the woodwinds, well, all of these are mostly the same except for the oboe. I decided for the oboe to follow my second violin. I thought it was so interesting that we could double it all the way from the beginning to the end, because now we add a little bit more feature to this counter melody, which is a little bit more important now than the rest. Our horn, though, is a little bit different because I added in the trumpet. And now I talked earlier about adding some air, and this is what I do here. I add some air to this brass section. Even though I just have one horn here, I wanted to give it some breath between the changing of the chords. So this is to go with the double bass here. These three are working together into creating this space for the rest of the music to go with. It's just at the end that I wanted the moment that we are more together. So I put the whole values here. So let's have a listen to this fourth version now. So a lot more orchestral friendly again. This is already a great version to me. Very expressive, very classical type of writing. But I wanted to add some more instruments again, because we can always add more, right? So let's go and see my final version. So it's not as crazy as I made it sound. It's just that I'm doing this orchestral crescendo through the ending. You see there's no dynamic written, but I assume that this music would be leading to a big climax. So what instrument do we use in that case to make it very classical sounding? So four horns is actually a lot for this period. Usually you have two horns and one trumpet. But let's say we break the rules a little bit, because the modern orchestra usually have more brass, and we could even consider having the contrabassoon and all that. But I decided to just have a standard modern orchestra. This is the most common group of winds that you'll encounter. So, but note that I use these extra instruments. So that's horn 2, 3, 4, and trombones, tubas, bass trombone as well, and second trumpet here. I use them only for the climax. So, the result is interesting because we're going from very classical type of orchestra and ending with a more romantic kind of orchestra. Just adding some timpani and some cymbals at the end as well. The timpani is very particular of a classical period. Cymbals are a little bit less, but still the cymbals give it this romantic kind of texture. So the instrument that you are already seen are the same. I was happy with my previous version. So what I'm doing here at first, introducing the horns, doing kind of a resonance response to the main melody, and then starting to blend a little bit more with the first horn. Basically, from here, I wanted the climax to occur, the expansion of the orchestra to occur. So the orchestral crescendo. And this is the time that I introduce the tuba, the trombones as well. And again, when I introduce this other instrument, following the weight that is supposed to go onto every note. So you see in this chord here, the D sharp is actually the root note of the chord because it's a D sharp diminished 7 chord. So it's much more proeminent. Just the fact that is it on my bass note make it more obvious because you're gonna have more instruments on these and more very audible instruments. I mean, the trombones and the tubas and the bassoons are like super loud instruments, and so it's very very obvious and very strong foundation here. And don't hesitate to add more of the bass line in general in all of your orchestrations. All of the notes have to be there, but you can have like 7 instruments, and then there's 4 of them playing the root note. There's maybe 2 of them playing the fifth of the chord, and then there's 1 of them playing the third of the chord. So again, following that for this, and adding in the trumpet right at the end for this IA. This is super intense. And just adding a little bit of something here, pam, 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 pam. So kind of adding into the cadence that I had. And this is again with my second line, my alto line, which I'm trying to expand here. And also this is double down here with my fourth horn. So let's hear this final version of this orchestral tonal music exercise. So I hope this video helped you understand more about orchestral tonal writing. And again, understanding the weight that you give to every one of these single notes when you're constructing the arrangement at first is super important. And it's a great way to create a certain dynamism through your harmonic discord instead of always having the same weight applied to every single chord, trying to vary them in this way and then trying to respect this guideline that you set at first through the whole orchestration process can really be a useful tool for orchestrators. Now, thanks to all of you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.